To God be the glory.
Hello, welcome back to our study of the book of Genesis. Now we'd made it down to chapter 41. You might remember the situation last time where Joseph interprets the dreams for the butler and the baker. Now the butler, also known as the cupbearer, was going to be restored. But the baker, of course, Joseph had to tell him that you are going to be killed. Well, those things took place, but one of the things Joseph told the cupbearer was, please remember me when you are restored back into Pharaoh's house. And at first, of course, he did not remember Joseph, did not say anything to Pharaoh, but now we're going to see that he is needed again, and the cupbearer remembers Joseph. This in our outline is Joseph's exaltation, chapter 41. So let's read verses 1 through 8. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadows. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. Now, verse 5, he slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. And behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dreams. But there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Now you might notice here we have 2 different dreams that are actually one and the same as far as the meaning of the dreams that take forth. Notice this chart here, Pharaoh's 2 dreams. We have the 7 lean cattle devoured by the 7 fat cattle, the 7 lean cattle that devour the 7 fat cattle, and the 7 lean ears of corn that devour the 7 fat ears of corn. And so here you have these dreams set up, and he sends out for all of his magicians and wise men, but they cannot tell him the meaning of this dream. Now it's this point that the butler is going to remember Joseph. Now let's look down to verse 9. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants, and put him in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. Both me and the chief baker, we each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. So the butler remembers Joseph. He tells Pharaoh about him and what Joseph had done for him. And so this is exactly what Joseph had wanted, someone to plead his case to Pharaoh. And of course, now is the opportunity. Now, through all of this, what do we see? Well, it's the providence of God. Here's God's hand working to lift up Joseph. He's going to be exalted in this house of Pharaoh. So, verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, and he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. In other words, he wanted to make himself presentable before he comes to the king. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. Now notice this, he's ready to give Joseph the credit for this. And I want you to notice how quickly Joseph changes that. Verse 16, so Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And so here, Joseph is not lifting himself up. He's not taking the credit in any way. He says, well, this is of God. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And so you see the attitude of Joseph, his humility, and the character that he has. Verse 17, Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river, and suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. And then, behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. And when they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning, so I awoke. So that's the first dream that is told to Joseph. Verse 22, Also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. And then behold, 7 heads withered thin and blighted by the east wind sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Well, of course they could not explain it, because these magicians, these wise men that he went to, they had no true wisdom. Truly, the only wisdom that exists is in God. And so that's what Joseph is teaching Pharaoh as we're going through these events. He is showing him that God is the source of all the wisdom and the good answers to these dreams. Verse 25, Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one. In other words, there's one interpretation for both. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. And so again, notice Joseph giving the credit to God. He says, God has shown this to Pharaoh. Here is God delivering you this important information so that indeed he could save his people during this time of famine. Well, in turn, also, it's going to be Joseph's family that's going to be saved as well. Verse 28, This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. And so here he's fully understanding now exactly what the dreams mean. Verse 31, So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following it, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. And so that's the reason why he has the 2 dreams that actually are one. They have the same interpretation to show that it has been established, that it is so, and this is what is going to take place. And so you see the emphasis there. Verse 33, Now therefore, let Pharaoh select concerning wise men, and set him over the land of Egypt. So in other words, select a wise man, a discerning man, set him over Egypt because of the difficult times that are coming. Verse 34, Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And so during this time of plenty, they can store up the good grain, so they'll be ready for the time of famine. Verse 35, And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And so in this way they'll be ready. Verse 36, Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. In other words, if they didn't make this plan, to save up this food, the famine would come and there would be nothing for the people to eat. And of course, the nation would perish without any food. Notice verse 37 down through 45 next. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all of his servants. In other words, they thought this was very wise to take such an approach as this. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Notice that. Here we're already getting to see Pharaoh learning, adjusting, understanding more concerning this. Yes, God is the one behind this. God has given him these dreams so that he can make the proper preparation during the time of famine. And here is his servant, Joseph. And so we see Pharaoh beginning to recognize that. All right, next, he's in Pharaoh, verse 38, and Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you." It says, well, who else would I pick except for you? Because you have shown yourself to be wise, and also that God is with him. Verse 40, "You shall be over my house and all my people, and shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." So notice Joseph is put second in command, and there's only one with greater authority than him, and that's Pharaoh. And so you think about that high position that he has been elevated to. Where was he before this? He was in the dungeon. He had nothing, and all he had was his character and his faith and trust in God. And because of that, he has been raised up to such a high position. Verse 41, "And Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt.' Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck." And so herein would be those things that would show that authority that has been given to him. And so these things would represent that. Verse 43, "And he had him ride in his second chariot, which he had, and they cried out before him, 'Bow the knee.' So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, 'I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt.' And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt." So Joseph is made ruler in a way over Egypt, second only to the Pharaoh, and Pharaoh renames him. Joseph has the new name Zaphnath-Paneah, as an Egyptian name, and he also gives Joseph a wife for his social standing. Asenath is given to him. She's the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On. On was a city. This is not talking about one of the false gods. Ra was the false sun god's name, but he is a priest of On, or from the city of On. And so notice Joseph is given all this responsibility. Here, all of the Egyptian people, they're going to owe their survival to him if they are able to survive when the famine does come. Now look at verse 46. "And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now in the 7 plentiful years the ground brought forth abundantly," just as God had said that it would, and it's happening. Verse 48, "So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. And Joseph gathered very much grain as the sands of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable." And so you can begin to understand just what a huge undertaking this is, to gather up all of this grain and to store it so that it would be available when the time of famine comes. Look at verse 50. "And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, from Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And so Manasseh literally means making me to forget. And so that's what he's forgetting, that toil and the problems that he had with his brother at his father's house. His brothers, of course, sold him into slavery. He's glad to forget those things. Verse 52, in the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And, of course, the name Ephraim means double fruit, or fruitful in that sense. So here the sons of Joseph are mentioned here. Now notice the rest of the chapter. Then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all the lands, but in all the lands of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, do." That's amazing that we see here Pharaoh putting so much trust and authority in Joseph that now the famine has come and the people are crying out to him, "Okay, what do we do?" He says, "You go to Joseph. You do whatever he tells you to do. That's the right thing." That's an incredible amount of trust that he is putting in Joseph. Verse 56, the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine became severe in the land of Egypt, so all the countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all lands. And so it was spread. It wasn't just localized just in Egypt. It had spread throughout all the lands, but only Egypt, because of Joseph, because of God and the dreams, had made those provisions for the days of famine. In that time when everything was plentiful, those things had been stored up, and so they were ready for the famine that came into the land. Now in chapter 42, what we're going to find is Joseph and his brethren. This is 42:1 through chapter 45, verse 15. And so in chapter 42, we're focusing in, if you look at the outline, the first journey of Joseph's brethren to Egypt. Now, this time without Benjamin. Later they're going to bring Benjamin, but this is their first journey there. Now, for just a time frame to help you in your understanding, about 22 years are between the sale of Joseph and the time his brothers will come to Egypt for food. There were 13 years to his promotion, and then 7 years of plenty, and now there's been 2 years of famine so far. And so notice this next in chapter 42, verses 1 through 5. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die." Well, why is he doing this? So they can live and not die. Now, that's the problem. There's famine in their land as well, and so they're quite concerned about that. Verse 3, so Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. And the sons of Israel went to buy grain, and among those who journeyed for the famine were in the land of Canaan. So Jacob sends his sons to Egypt for the food, because that's the only way they can survive, lest we die. And it was a severe famine. But notice Benjamin is kept behind, and he says, lest some calamity befall him. Jacob is protective of Rachel's remaining child, quote unquote. He doesn't know about Joseph, that he has survived yet. And so he thinks, this is it. All I have left is Benjamin of Rachel. And so he's going to protect him at all costs. All right, let's look at the next section, starting with verse 6. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sowed to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. All right, let's stop there. Notice, they bowed down before him. Does that remind you of the dreams that he had and that he told his brothers that it would take place? Now, that prophecy is fulfilled. Verse 7, Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." Now, of course, they did not recognize him as their brother. All this time has passed by. They would not expect to see Joseph being in such a position of authority and command, probably dressed like an Egyptian governor, and so they do not recognize him as their brother. But he knows them. Verse 8, so Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them, and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." You say, well, why is he doing that? Why is he saying such a thing? He knows it is not so. Well, this is a test. He wants to determine if they have changed their ways any. Remember, they are the ones who threw him into the pit, were going to kill him, but then eventually sold him to the Midianites. Yeah, are they still the same cruel brothers that they were before? And so he's testing them. Verse 10, and they said to him, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." But he said to them, "No, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." Now, you notice how that is explained, that here they're talking about the brothers, and so he tells them about the one that is no more. Well, that's Joseph. They're actually talking to Joseph, not realizing it, but talking to him about himself, about Joseph. Yeah, one is at home, that's Benjamin, and one is no more, and that's Joseph. And here are the 10 brothers who are all present there to meet with Joseph. Now, Joseph gives them a method in which they can prove that they are not spies. Remember, he's testing them. He wants to see what kind of character they have. Verse 14, but Joseph said to them, "It is as I spoke to you, saying, you are spies. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother, Benjamin, come here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." So he put them all together in prison 3 days. And so here's what he's telling them to do. You're going to send back one to get your youngest brother, Benjamin, to bring him, just to test to make sure that you're not lying, that your words are indeed true. Notice verse 18. Then Joseph said to them the 3rd day, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words may be verified, and you shall not die." And they did so. And so now he kind of changes the conditions. He says, well, you can just keep one here, and I'll send the rest of you back with the grain so that the family has the food that they need. So y'all go back and then bring your youngest brother to me so I can make sure that you're not a spy. Verse 21. Then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, Did I not speak to you, saying, Do not sin against the boy? And you would not listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. Then he returned to them again and talked with them, and took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. All right, so now we get some additional information here concerning Joseph and what's going on and how he is presenting himself. Notice the brothers, they claim that this terrible situation is really punishment because of the way they have treated Joseph. And Joseph, they don't know that it's him, and he's using an interpreter. And so he's speaking in Egyptian, and an interpreter relays it to them in Hebrew. And so he's disguised himself in this way. And then Simeon is called upon to stay and to remain while they go back and get their brother. Now, notice 25 through 28. Then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded the donkeys with the grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. So he said to his brothers, "My money has been restored, and there it is in my sack." And then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying one to another, "What is this that God has done to us?" Now Joseph restores their money. He gives them extra rations for the trip. And then one of them discovers the money, and they're afraid. And notice this response. They say, "What is it that God has done to us?" Well, why are they blaming God? What about their personal responsibility? You remember back in verse 21, look at that verse again, chapter 42, verse 21. It says, "Then they said to one another, 'We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this distress has come upon us.'" What's going on here? They should have understood the terrible things that they had done, and now they're trying to blame God for this trouble. Well, men often look elsewhere. They want to blame someone else for their own faults, for their own calamities. We see that in our day today, where some will blame God for things that come upon them in their life because of things they have done, that they have brought these problems into their own life, and they try to blame God for that. And so these men are no different. There's still some growth that needs to take place, and they need to understand completely their guilt for what they did to their brother. Look at verse 29. "Then they went to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan and told him all that had happened to them, saying, 'The man who is Lord of the land,'" and that's of course is Joseph, "'spoke roughly to us and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, We are honest men, we are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan.' Then the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, 'By this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me, take food for the famine of your households, and be gone. And bring,'" imagine when he heard this, "'and bring your youngest brother to me, so I shall know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men, and I will grant your brother to you, that you may trade in the land.'" Well, that's the last thing that Jacob wants to happen, to send Benjamin to this land. Perhaps he'll be killed. He doesn't know. He doesn't want that to happen. Verse 35. "Then it happened as they emptied their sacks that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. What's going on here? And Jacob their father said to them, 'You have bereaved me. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin? All these things are against me.' And then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, 'Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you.' And so here Reuben's speaking up, saying, 'I'll protect him. Don't worry, I'll make sure and bring Benjamin back.' Verse 38, "But he said, 'My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. And if any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring him down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. In other words, if that happened to him, if he dies, that would just kill me. It would be more grief than I would be able to handle. And so we'll have to stop there and into chapter 42. We'll begin chapter 43 next time. See you then.